This week on Head to Head, the Mandalorian TV series.
You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars. Begins now.
All right, hello everybody. I'm Eric Vancil.
And I'm back. I'm Darryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this podcast. So yeah, Darryl, speaking of the fact that you're back, you had kind of a nasty accident.
Yeah.
Tell everybody what happened to you.
So at the end of August, I was leaving work and my friend was dropping me off. My partner was dropping me off at home. And on our way, we got into a bit of an accident where the car ran into the back of us, and the force of it actually broke my leg in two places, where I had the bone coming out of the leg and it actually tore a tendon. And fortunately, I couldn't see that part, but it was pretty painful, definitely.
Yeah, I remember visiting you in the emergency room, man. You were in a lot of pain. I don't think I've ever seen you in that much pain.
Yeah, I think that's the most pain I've ever been in my life, and it's definitely not fun. But I definitely appreciate everyone's prayers and best wishes for my speedy recovery. I'm doing pretty well. Still have a little ways to go. I've been doing some treatments in a hyperbaric chamber, which is what I've been calling my little backup tank. So minus the water, but it's been helping with my therapy pretty well, and soon I should be back on my feet. And I think that will be really great for myself, and I can, get back to doing all of the different things that I love to do. Of course, Star Wars stuff, and you've had a chance to go to some cool Star Wars things without me, so we'll talk about that later. But yeah, it's
I'm
been
sorry. Cool. I had to do it, though.
Yeah, no, man,
I'm just thinking of the people with the podcast, man. It wasn't selfish.
Totally understand. No, you got to do what's best for the show, of course.
Nice. Well, all right, let's get into it. It's time. Where are we going?
Well, you know what? It's been a while since I've had a drink, so let's go to the Cantina.
That's right. Okay. So now that we're in the Cantina, we're going to talk about a couple of comic book releases that have come out over the last, well, I mean, how long have you been gone? Like a couple of months.
Well, yeah, my accident was at the end of August 28th, so I've been pretty much away all the month of September. But I was eternally grateful for you bringing some really cool Darth Vader comics to me. So
See how good of a friend I am.
So that was really awesome. I got a chance to read those, and they were really, really great. I mean, if you haven't got a chance to read those, I think they start with the episode 16, almost to 19 or 20. I mean, there is some really good stuff with Vader. You get to see the relationship with him and Tarkin. That was an awesome I keep want to say episode, but it was awesome because it feels like you're actually watching it, because you can kind of envision it in your head when you're reading these comics, and they're really, really cool. And you get to see Vader being hunted by Tarkin, and Vader wants to be tested. And it's really cool to see that and how he's surviving without a lightsaber. And Tarkin is trying to find creative ways to trap Vader because he also still has the Force, which he can't take away from him. So it's really, I mean, I'm not going to give away everything, but
yeah, no, that was actually one of my favorite issues too.
Yeah, man.
I remember reading it, and it's so cinematic.
Yeah. And
it is cool that they do actually start out with the crawl, before each. And actually, I think that's true with all the comics in the Star Wars line. Yeah. They actually start out with the whole crawl, and they tell you a little bit about what was going on. And then, yeah, they get into it. And I mean, you do see a little bit more of that relationship with Vader and Tarkin. And the other thing that I liked about it too is that you really see how devastatingly powerful Vader really is.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that he was doing to those people was just crazy. And then, but it definitely showed the cunningness of Tarkin, how he definitely played chess the whole time, and he kind of knew exactly where he wanted to go with it, and but then he also found a new respect for Vader because of his willingness to do whatever it takes to get the job done.
Well, not only that, but I mean, it's like every time, Tarkin thought he had him.
Yeah.
Vader was just easily, well, sometimes not so easily, but pretty much for the most part, he was easily able to get out of it. And yeah, it was just funny too, because Tarkin was so frustrated at times.
Yeah, he even realized that Vader could do stuff that he didn't know he could do, and he's like, I didn't think he could do that.
Right.
So
exactly. Like, where is this coming from?
Like, okay. So yeah, I thought that was really awesome. So if you haven't had a chance to check those out, please do. Darth Vader, our Darth Vader comics, starting around issue 16.
Yeah, that's where I got it from you. But honestly, this last run, because that was number 16 of this last run that they've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, 1 through 15 is awesome. I think they're up to, what was the last one I got? Like 23? I mean, they're really getting really good. Now, I don't know. I haven't gotten any notification about, because I subscribe to them, their Comixology, which is like, they're kind of in, if you have an Amazon Prime membership, you can sign up for them too. And you could do actually like unlimited borrows from their stuff, so you can actually like just download some of the stuff.
Sweet.
Like, for instance, man, phlegm today. I'm actually reading the old Dark Empire series.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Which is really, really trippy.
Yeah.
Because, I think that's the one where Luke briefly turns to the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
And then he comes back. And I had never really read that series of comics before, so I wanted to actually check it out. Okay. So I'm doing that. And, of course, I'm keeping up with the Thrawn series. That's another one, by the way, guys. They actually made a comic series out of the first Thrawn novel that Zahn wrote in this new canon. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out, and maybe you don't want to read through the whole novel, but you still want to get a really good idea of the story, check out the comic series. I think they're up to it's a 6-part series, and I think they did finally release part 6.
Okay.
And that's a really, really good series. I haven't read it yet, but the Poe Dameron series is getting a lot of really, really good responses.
Yeah, he's becoming a real pivotal character in a lot of different areas.
Yeah, he really is. He's crossing a lot of different, he pops up in a lot of the novels. He's
TV show now.
Yep. Yeah. So, he's really becoming one of the main focal points of the new canon.
Yeah, so definitely check out these comics. They are really awesome. Some great stories, and it fills in a lot of gaps for those of you who are going to see the movies. You kind of have a little bit of the backstory of some of these really great characters.
Oh yeah.
So I heard that you got a chance to go to see
I'm so sorry.
to see the Detroit Symphony Orchestra.
I thought about you the whole time, though, man.
Yeah,
the whole time I was sitting there going, man, I really wish he was with me on this.
If only Darryl were here.
Yeah, if only Darryl were here. Well, you know what? I mean, I went on a whim because even a couple of friends of mine had said to me, hey, how come you didn't tell me you were going to this thing? I would have gone with you. And I'm like, well, the way the job's been and everything, it's kind of like, look, I have to make these decisions on a whim.
Mm-hmm.
Now, usually I'll go to a concert or something like that. Like, I'll get tickets the day before or the day of the show.
Right.
Because that's the only time that I'm sure, or at least reasonably sure, I could go. But this one, I found out about it, I think the week before the event. Okay. Or no, what it is because I donate money every year to the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. So naturally, they send me all their concert announcements. And, like usually once a year at least, they always do some Star Wars related thing or, where they're going to play the music of John Williams or something.
Mm-hmm. So
I got these notifications, and I'm like, okay, well, that's cool. I should check it out, like we always talk about.
Right.
But then we never do it. And this was destined to be another one of those things. But then it was about a week and a half before the event, and I saw there was nothing on the production schedule, and they kept saying something about, A New Hope. The DSO presents A New Hope. And I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. Well, it turned out that what they ended up doing, it wasn't a concert of just the music from A New Hope. They actually showed A New Hope on the screen, with the dialogue, but they had removed the music, and the Detroit Symphony Orchestra played the music live.
Wow.
While you're watching the movie.
Sweet. Yeah, yeah.
And it was just,
that had to be a completely awesome experience.
It's a new experience, man. And what's cool is you hear all these nuances.
Mm-hmm.
They actually blended it pretty well, but you hear all these nuances and you really get a new respect for what John Williams really brought to this, because you're listening to this music and you can hear every little, instrument and stuff. And you're like, how did he even come up with this?
Right. Yeah.
Just watching the scene.
It's pure genius, man.
Yeah. And if anybody, I don't know if they do this in other cities or or what, but if you live in the Detroit area and they ever do anything like this again, a friend of mine was talking about they did that with one of the Harry Potter movies.
Okay, yeah, that would be sweet too.
Somebody else said they did one for Return of the King, one of the Lord of the Rings movies. So, yeah, I mean, I guess they do that periodically, at least around here. So if you're from the Detroit area, I would highly suggest, that you definitely check that out.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like a really cool. And, of course, you get to see the movie again, so...
Yeah, well, that was another thing, too, right?
It's like an added bonus. You get to actually watch Star Wars again.
Yeah, and it was...
New arena.
It was just like, man, I wish they would do that with Empire Strikes Back.
Yes. Now, see, if they do that, I don't care what kind of accident I'm in.
That's what I'm saying. You'll crawl there.
It's like, look, airlift
hobble
me.
over there.
Put me in like one of those little tanks or whatever they put like Anakin in at the end of Revenge of the Sith and just make sure I'm in there.
Well, right now you're basically Klieg Lars.
Very funny.
I expect you to roll up in your wheelchair, Darryl Sanders. My man, I got to make the jokes.
Of course.
But hey, speaking of the episodes, there's a little thing going around about episode 9 where people have been asking, should episode 9 be split into 2 movies? I haven't heard that as much recently, but I remember not too long after you got into the accident, it was kind of a big thing. And I remember thinking to myself, you know what? This would make a really good discussion topic. I'm going to hold on to this, and I'm going to wait until you're able to come back in so we could talk about it.
Well, I like the idea. I think they're borrowing a little bit of that from the MCU, but I'm all for it so long as it serves the story. With us being in production, we always are talking about it has to support the story. So if the story dictates, and I know a lot of the movies sometimes are running close to 3 hours and things of that nature, and it is the last one in this particular saga there, and JJ has been said that he's trying to tie in a lot of things, even from the prequels, into this. So there could be a lot of different elements to this movie that you may need. And of course, I would love to see that. I mean, I think there's a lot of, and in my opinion, I think you have a lot of ground to cover because a whole lot wasn't done, in my opinion, with 8. That's one of the things I felt like 8 was missing, was that there was a lot of different pockets or things that, okay, we spent too much time on this and we could have spent more time on that. So I think that now, because, you have Rey, who essentially has to rebuild the Jedi Order. What is Kylo going to do? I mean, there's no Snoke anymore, so he's basically his own supreme leader. What is he going to do with the First Order? Is he going to, where are the Knights of Ren that we saw from the Force Awakens in that flashback scene? There's so many different things that, and is he going to rebuild the Sith? Is he going to try to, or is he completely like, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do my own thing. So like, there's so much. And then of course, depending on when 9 takes place, 8, we knew 8 had to take place like right after 7 because of how 7 ended. But now it was kind of like, all right, well, how much time has passed between 8 and 9? Because now Rey, how strong has Rey become? She has the books that from the tree and everything like that. She, and I'm sure Kylo is still searching for like artifacts, and he's like Indiana Jones, over there.
The Sith version.
Exactly, even though he killed the real Indy. But so it's just, to me, there's a lot of space and there's a lot of gaps that need to be, in my opinion, as a fan, needs to be covered. And 2 movies may be the best way to do that. And if it does, of course, we're going to see both. I mean, you have to.
Well, yeah, and I concur, I suppose. I mean, the thing is, I kind of have mixed feelings about it, because on one hand, while it would be a deviation away from the norm, I'm not as hung up on the whole traditional aspects as a lot of fans. Like a lot of people were really bothered by the lack of an opening crawl in the standalone films. I thought that was one of the things that actually made it cool. The standalone films gives you the opportunity to venture away from what, most people would expect. On the other hand, particularly with Rogue One, I think it could have used some sort of context, and an opening crawl would have at least been able to put you in there. But as far as putting in episode 9 into 2 movies, I would be okay with it, like you said, if it served the story and if it needed it, because you do bring up a good point. I mean, they have a lot of ground to cover in this movie. And especially everything that we've been hearing lately, you know, the whole time that you've been away, I've been obviously thinking about, well, what can we talk about? Because the problem is there's so many things that have been happening over the last couple of months. It's like, man, we got to discuss this and we got to discuss that.
Right.
And, you know, I've been trying to keep track of it in my head. And one of the things is that JJ wants to bring in all these things from the prequels. He wants to tie all 9 films together. There's all these things happening. It's like, how are you going to do that even in a 2.5-hour movie? Now, it could be done. And I go back and forth. I say, do I want a 3-hour movie or would I rather have 2 movies?
Yeah, because, I mean, even with that, I mean, and I'm just talking about, there's a lot of information that we need to know and cover just between Rey and Kylo.
Well, that's true.
But we still haven't dealt with Finn. We still have to deal with Leia and Poe. You know what I mean? There's so much that has to be answered. You know, if
well,
you're going to
got to figure out
and
what's going on with Luke. And
yeah, because, I mean...
Then they have to deal with the whole political side, right? I mean, and everybody seems to gloss over the fact that in Force Awakens, they destroyed the entire New Republic government.
Right.
And like 5 or 6 planets or something.
Exactly.
I mean,
somebody's got to answer for that.
Well, the thing that's funny about that is that it just shows you how, I don't know if we just seen it all before or whatever, but when they blew up Alderaan in A New Hope, that was like a big thing.
Right.
You know, and it's kind of like, and you know, that was a big focus and that was something that, rightfully so. And I think people just forget. Can you imagine blowing up an entire planet full of people?
That's just insane.
You know, and it's like, well, in Force Awakens, they blew up like 5 and took out the entire galaxy's government in the process. And it's like, you know, you're watching episode 8 and you're going, does anybody want to, I don't know, mention this, or does this have any ramifications? They have to deal with that in 9.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, in my opinion, I think that's kind of that's how they're going to gracefully bow out Leia. It's because she's the only one who can really, if you really think about it, from the time she was on Alderaan with, you know...
Well, she would definitely know the ramifications, but don't forget, and, you know, this is another interesting thing about the Leia character, too, because if you just want to even talk about her for episode 9, okay, first of all, in the novel Bloodline, they dealt with how the New Republic government actually somewhat turned against her when they found out that she was Vader's daughter. Sorry for the spoilers, everybody, but as we stated initially... You know, you're really tiptoeing through a minefield here. We don't respect spoilers. I mean, if a movie comes out, yeah, we're not going to talk about spoilers or anything until we know everybody's seen it, but Bloodline's been out for a while.
Yeah.
So, you know, they found out that, you know, she was Vader's daughter. And then on top of that, that was the sowing the seed of the whole resistance thing, because she realized that it's almost like they became the new rebellion, obviously. That's how they framed it. But when you look at it, you know, with all this other material that they have, the novels, the comics, things like that took place around this time, you see that they basically thought that she was like a warmonger or something.
Yeah. And
so naturally, you know, once this government is wiped out, it's really interesting to see how they're going to use her, because keep in mind, they've already announced that they're going to use footage predominantly from The Force Awakens and then some from The Last Jedi. So I'm really curious on how they're going to, maybe they won't gracefully bow out. Maybe she'll stay alive.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, I think that they're going to gracefully bow her out in the sense of, because, you know, she put that distress call out and no one answered.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that's a big part of that is...
You think she's going to be disillusioned in some way?
Well, I think she's going to have to figure out and build the government from scratch herself. I think she's going to have to be the one, because really because since all those other planets blew up, you know, Coruscant, everything else, now you have
Well, Coruscant's
no, Coruscant's, that's right.
Is Hosnian Prime.
Hosnian Prime, right, thank you.
Yeah, that's the new central, but I know what you're talking about, the central place for government.
Yeah, for government. So now you have, okay, Leia has been around for a while. So she was around for the first galactic, empire and everything like that, being on Alderaan and from the original trilogy. And of course, she's been in all these different confrontations and political wars and battles and things like that. So it's almost like who's better than her at this point? Or who's still alive at this point?
Well, see,
that's going to really...
Here's my theory. My theory is, who's going to answer that distress call and kind of become the new Leia? Poe's going to rise up, but I think that's where Lando comes in. Because Lando was the old general. He was, he was an administrator at Bespin. He would be the guy that could actually step up and be the central political figure, maybe. Yeah, I think that everybody can rally around. Plus, he was he's a Republic hero.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because he did run a whole mining colony operation. So I mean, he has administrative,
he's got the
political. Yeah, he's got the background, and I think that's a good way to. And Leia's going to need all the help that she can get.
Yeah, and then if you look at it too from the real world perspective, now that Carrie Fisher is no longer with us, they need some original trilogy figure to basically, be a central...
Hold it together.
Yeah, pretty much to hold it together.
Well, and also, with now that Han's dead, Lando can finally take that shot at Leia.
Yeah. Hello, what have we here?
Exactly.
That's it.
Yep.
I mean, whether or not they split it into two movies, I don't... Just by the way things are going now, it doesn't look like they're going to. But remember... The question isn't, are they going to split into two movies? It's, should they? So we want to hear from you guys.
Yeah.
What do you all think they should do? Should they split it into two movies? Or should they just do in one?
Yeah, because one last thing, because I think Bob Iger said that after 9, Star Wars is going to kind of slow down for a while.
Yeah.
And so now, with that happening, once again, I think if it's going to be a while, if they decide to do any more episodic trilogies or whatnot, like 10, 11, and 12, then you have to, you don't want to wait too long before people don't, and people are lost. So I think if you definitely tie up all this, which is a lot, like I said, it's a lot of stuff. So I think
if they want to do it right,
if they want to do it right, and
that's a lot.
And that's the big thing, is because everybody is, a lot of people weren't happy with 8. So if you're going to bring it home,
well, let's just
itemize
this, right? Okay, they have to deal with Kylo and the Knights of Ren. They have to deal with the Snoke issue.
Yeah, Snoke because him being gone, what his role was to begin with.
Yep. They have to talk about rebuilding the Jedi Order and Rey's story.
Yep.
If they want to still deal with their parents, which they might, they have to deal with what's going on with the Republic. Mm-hmm. We have to figure out one way or another what's happening with Leia.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's,
and you still have to worry about Finn. Like, where does he?
Finn,
how does he? Poe. So that's like 7 major keys right there. Out the gate. I mean, there's still,
and then if you want to bring in elements from the prequels and the original trilogy and really tie it all together, because they have actually referenced the prequel. I mean, even in Episode 7, right? Kylo was like, "Oh, maybe we should have just used clones or something." Right. That was a little nod to the prequels, and there have been some here and there, but for the most part, yeah, they just have a lot of things that they really need to wrap up in 9. And I mean, normally I'm not really a big fan of splitting something into 2 movies, but I will say, hey, I mean, when you look at the Harry Potter series, 7th book, what was it, Deathly Hallows? Yeah. So they ended up splitting that last book into 2 movies. Now, it was a single book, but because the story was so vast, and that's the thing that's funny about the Harry Potter books, if you read them, the first couple are just like these normal, couple 100-page novels or whatever, and then they just started getting thick.
Yeah, like half a dictionary.
Yeah, to the point where you're just like, okay, man, I mean, this is kind of excessive, I mean, a lot of trees died, much like Bothans,
right,
to bring us this. So, But again, it's because they felt like, look, there's a lot that's happening here. We really need to split it up. Now, on the other side of that, though, they didn't really split up the Lord of the Rings movies.
No, but Twilight did it, and that was they.
Well, yeah,
they
but I mean,
split that up.
and some of that though too is I think it's just becoming a trend to make more money.
Could be,
to drag it out.
And let's not. We can't rule that out either. I mean, it's Disney.
Yeah.
so I mean, then you still. I mean, like you have other movies like Hunger Games who've done it. And of course now,
like I said, I think
Marvel,
it's a trend. Well, in Marvel,
with the Avengers story, like I said, just depend. Like that story it's a massive story that you have to kind of like.
And that's why I don't get me wrong, I don't disagree. I think that if they really need to do it right, there certainly is a precedence for it.
Absolutely.
And I think that if they need to do the movie right, to split it into two movies would be definitely a solution. But they would have to release it. If they were going to do it, I don't know. Now, here's another question for you. I mean, this is almost becoming a featured topic.
I know.
And actually, this actually was lifted from an episode that we were going to do. It was going to be the one I think we were going to record the Friday after you got in your accident. This was a featured topic, and I just didn't want to let it go, so we put it here, but sorry, guys. You're just going to have to listen to a lot of conversation.
But that's what you're here for. Anyway.
That's what everybody's here for. But here's the thing. So basically, you have this movie, okay, and if it's going to be a part one, do you think part two should come out in May or the following December?
Oh, I guess it probably depends on the timing. Like if they're able to get all the shots and everything that they need, even if they did, let's just say they got all the shots, I would still say wait until at least the following May. I guess I would just say follow the MCU.
See, it's a really tough thing though, because now we have a precedent set now for a December and then a May film. Now, granted, they were two different movies. You had The Last Jedi, which somewhat divided fans.
Right.
And then Solo came out.
Right.
And just 4 months or 5 months later. Now, that turned out not to be the best move. We're not sure whether or not, and we discussed this, I think, in our last podcast, whether or not that was part of what hurt the box office. But this being a part two, you can make the argument that people would really want to see it. Why make them wait? On the other hand, if they wanted to, I think it would mostly be based on business.
Well, I would say make them, not to borrow a line from Coming to America, but let them wait.
Don't forget, you're talking about you'd have to wait too.
Yeah, I know, but you know what? I would rather wait, and this is why I say that. I would rather wait for quality. I don't want to, if it's going to be the last saga, like if it's going to be last of the saga, we're finally wrapping, get it right. I don't want to have a bunch of the director. We had to get the director fired or reshoot. So I don't want any of those problems. I just want a good.
Okay, but what would happen? What would happen though if pretend that quality is not the issue though?
Okay,
like they could do it. It doesn't matter. The movie's made. The quality is fine. Because let's just say they shot it back to back. So if they do that, then by the time episode 9 came out, episode 9B would, or 9.5 or something, would be coming out, right? It's done. It was all shot at once. The quality is there. So quality doesn't matter. It comes down to which do you think would be now you got to put the business hat on. Which do you think would be the smartest move for Disney to make from a business perspective?
I still would say May, just because that's blockbuster time. I mean, think about it, you're going to make the most bang for your buck. I mean, everybody releases movies and especially out of their franchise in May. So.
I agree, and I'll tell you why else I agree, because besides the fact you could take advantage of those blockbuster dollars, even though, let's face it, December has not hurt them.
Not at all.
In fact, you could say that was the smartest move because there was no other movies.
At that time.
That time, and then you can own that time of year. That becomes Star Wars time. But what I like about the May date is that you take advantage of the blockbuster season, And then you can release the DVD or Blu-ray pretty much during the holiday season, and then take advantage of that.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
What's our next thing?
Well, our next segment is Duel of the Fates. So for today's Duel of the Fate, we have the older Jedi versus the newer Jedi. Which one was better in battle?
Now, is it newer or are we talking about younger?
Well, I'm sorry, younger Jedi.
Okay, so what we're talking about here, guys, just so you know, a lot of times you get these debates that happen about, who's a better Jedi or whatever, and it tends to come down to the younger ones versus older ones. And a lot of this is because of the fact that, because of the technology, and you don't even have to compare different characters. You could just look at, say, older Obi-Wan versus younger Obi-Wan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, the younger ones can probably best the older ones in lightsaber duels. Maybe. That's part of the debate. And then, of course, the older that they get, the more power they have. So, but the question is, who's better in battle?
Well,
and good luck if you actually got anything from that question. Not sure I really put that as clear as I would have liked to.
Well, I will say this. Younger doesn't always mean better. It just means faster and more creative. But the older you are, you refine your techniques to the point where you don't need to do as much.
Yep.
You conserve your energy because you have other things. And that's just in life. And that's just, granted, myself being a martial artist, in my younger days, I was doing the crazy kicks and you want to jump high and you want to do all these flashy things. But then when it comes to reality and being practical, it's not as effective.
It just looks pretty.
It just looks pretty.
So then what you're saying is the you now would beat the younger you.
Definitely.
And why?
Because it's more about skill set and it's more so about maximizing things in a shorter time. So what would take me
economy
5 moves, it's like what would take me 6 or 7 moves to do because I'm trying to be all cool and impress everybody. It's kind of like, it's almost like that scene from Indiana Jones where the guy's doing all those kicks in the air and Indy just pulls the gun out and just shoots him. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, look, I don't need to do all this. And I think that's and a lot of people have those issues with the Star Wars movies because they're going to get me wrong. The prequel movies, the lightsaber duels are way more entertaining. Like they're way more like heart pumping and it's exciting. But if you really look at, the original trilogy, they weren't doing a bunch of like Vader fighting Obi-Wan. That was a slow fight. Luke and Vader was a slow fight both times.
Mm-hmm.
Even when, and it wasn't an extensive duel. Literally like the duel lasted because half the time it's a bunch of dialogue in the middle.
Yeah. And in some cases, I think it might even be more realistic, like what you would really see.
Yeah, and it's like, it's not so much so you're trying to make an action movie out of it, but it's more so like, okay, we're in the midst of this fighting. I'm trying to convince you to come to the dark side, or I'm trying to convince you that, hey, you don't have to be this way. So once again, you're trying to further the story in that capacity. You just happen to be fighting at that time.
More drama.
Exactly. Whereas in the prequels, it's more like, all right, here's a section like you kill my master. I'm ticked about it. It's go time. And it's like, go get him, Obi-Wan. Or, wow, doesn't Darth Maul look so cool with the double head and he's spinning it around his head and he's doing cartwheels and flips. And that's cool. So, but.
Well, here's an interesting point too, is that when you watch Rebels.
Right.
Okay. And you see Darth Maul there, he fights differently.
He does.
There's definitely more of an experience and you could see that the older Maul would probably defeat the younger Maul.
And even when they did, Darth Maul finally got to Obi-Wan. The fight was done in like 2 minutes. Why? Now, initially, when we first saw them go at it, in episode 1, the battle, fight lasted a little bit, but in that it lasted like 30 seconds. Why? Because Obi-Wan, he's more centered, he's more focused. He doesn't have that anxious. He has more control over his.
Well, and now you're talking even light side versus dark side because Maul was definitely out for revenge, and Obi-Wan just wanted to end it.
Right.
And so he was more centered. He was more focused.
And even if you looked at, The Last Jedi, had Kylo not been so enraged and just so ticked off at Luke, he probably would have realized that wasn't him standing there in the first place.
That's true.
One, he should have been able to sense that in the Force. I mean, once that's your uncle, so you should be able to have that family tie, number one.
Well, this could actually become another discussion point for a later podcast, but you almost have to wonder, in Luke's power, was he able to even project his presence along with his image?
That's possible too. But even still,
I mean, even Leia didn't know, and he was physically interacting with her.
Yeah, but the other thing is that even if that happened, okay, I'll give him that. It's still the physical of you're leaving marks on Salt, and he's not.
Yeah.
That's observation, but that's youth, though. Youth, you're not looking for those things. You're just about go.
Well, it's emotion, baby.
And exactly, and that's because that's where Kylo was at that time. He's so focused on, and the fact that he's trying to finally get rid of this last person that stands in his way, and he's missing all the telltale signs that you're fighting yourself, essentially.
Well, and here's another thing, too. If you go back, you remember when I talked about seeing, and I don't know if you have had a chance to watch it yet, but somebody actually redid the episode 4, Obi-Wan versus Vader.
Oh, yeah, that was awesome.
Style.
Yeah, that was awesome.
But even then, they still fought differently than they would have in the prequels. Like, they maintained the experience level. They made it a more entertaining fight and a little bit more perhaps realistic for what a Jedi and a Sith would actually do, even at that age. But, because, look, we all know that the reason why those duels were the way they were is, number one, Lucas kept telling the actors that, these lightsabers are heavy. They're like broadswords, and, you have to act like that. So it was really poor direction on his part that made it that way. Maybe not even poor direction. He changed his mind, obviously. But then, of course, the other thing was just the choreography really wasn't, they weren't trying to do that. They were trying to present a slightly different thing. So in a sense, Lucas almost had to retcon his own series.
Yeah.
So there was that. But you can, in universe, explain this by saying, look, it's no different than, I'm glad you brought up the whole martial arts example, because that's true. It's like the older that you get, you start thinking of economy of motion. What's necessary? You're not thinking of flash. You're thinking of
get the job done.
Get the job done.
Quickly as possible. Like, I'm not about to sit here and jump around and spin and go in circles with you. You walk up on me, I'm trying to take you down in probably 3 or 4 moves at best.
Yeah,
and I'm going home.
And you take 2 prominent older Jedi from the prequels, which would be Yoda and Mace. There is no doubt in my mind that every Jedi Knight in that temple could have gone up against them, and they would have been wiped out probably within 20 minutes.
Yep.
Because of the experience and power. That's another thing that we really didn't touch on, is the fact that because they're more knowledgeable in the Force, they've learned more of the power. That's why I think that you see a lot of these guys. I mean, even Dooku and Yoda, right? 2 older, well, one's a Sith Lord, but he was a former Jedi. They're like, okay, well, obviously, our knowledge of the Force is just kind of a draw, so we might as well just draw out these lightsabers and
just have a go and see
what happens.
See what happens, right? And that's once again, like, you're looking at the comparison of now Anakin, you would think that, okay, he was taught by Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was, if you read in the books, he was a great swordsman. Not as great as maybe Qui-Gon in his prime, but he was pretty good.
Yeah, well, the whole idea behind Obi-Wan being really good, if I remember correctly, was one, he was using a style. I don't remember all the names of all the. There's like 7 lightsaber dual styles or something like that.
His was more defensive.
Yeah, his is more defensive, and it was also one that wasn't used as much. And it somewhat combined a few things, and that's usually what threw people off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where Anakin adopted more of a Bruce Lee approach, where he started combining a bunch of different lightsaber styles, and then people were really confused because he could just switch up the style depending on who he was fighting.
And that's the thing about fighting is that, you know, even if you look at the martial arts, there are certain what we call like fingerprints, or, you know, there are certain tail signs like, oh, he's using wushu, or he's using Shotokan karate, or he's using all these different types of, that we can picture, or we can see by certain movements like, oh, okay, I know that art form. But the thing about Anakin, though, is that when he was coming at Dooku, he used very little movement because his was more of a fencing style. Even his lightsaber hilt was more designed for parries, and he's not trying to go back and forth with you. He's just basically deflecting, striking, striking.
I loved his lightsaber.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was the coolest
angled hilt. Yeah, it's still, to me, he has like the coolest lightsaber.
Yeah, it was cool, but it had a reason for it to be, and that's the thing I had a problem with Kylo's. It was because, okay, when I first saw the whole like prong thing, I was like, okay, they went like old school, like,
well, there is a reason for the way his lightsaber.
Well, yeah, I mean, I see it, but I just...
It's an unstable crystal, and the vents were put in there because you had to vent it out.
Yeah. But I just feel like it's still like, okay, I kind of like the tradition. Maybe I'm just being a traditionalist.
I'll tell you. Well, see, now that should have been another Duel of the Fates question. Like, who, you know, what about his lightsaber? Because I actually think that it's great. I love his lightsaber because it totally fits his character. He's an unstable guy, and why wouldn't his lightsaber be unstable?
Yeah, I mean, it does fit him, and that's one of the things that...
He's actually one of my favorite characters in Star Wars.
Oh, yeah, I mean, because he's different. He's very...
Yeah, he's somebody we've never seen before.
Yeah, exactly. And I think he's like the kid with anger management issues, and he's just...
Completely. And
he's just kind of like off, almost like...
And he's in charge, and, you know, his own people don't know how to deal with him. I mean, Vader was feared, but he was feared because he was absolutely in control, and he was ultra powerful.
He was so imposing. Where
Kylo's more feared because he's just so erratic and he's powerful, and you have no idea what this guy's going to do.
Right. You know, like when you hear him just slashing away in a room, and Stormtrooper's like, yeah, I'm going to go the other way.
See, and this is why I'm curious to see 9 now, because before, everybody knew that Snoke was ultimately in charge. And Snoke had that measured, calm demeanor.
Right.
You know, so I think that the First Order troops basically were, okay, we got this Kylo guy, he's a little nuts, but at least our main boss is cool. Well, now he is the main boss.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm saying. Like now, and that's going to be a thing for Kylo, because now he's got to try to, he already has a confrontational relationship with Hux. Yeah. So is he going to leave Hux in control, and he's going to finally have that rule over Hux? Well, or is he going to just completely get rid of Hux and just take it over himself?
And there is a rumor going around. Once again, we'll probably end up discussing this at length in a future episode, but there's been rumors going around that Hux is actually going to betray the First Order because he hates Kylo so much that he actually slips a bunch of information to the Resistance to play them against Kylo. So he's not really betraying the First Order per se, he's just using the Resistance to get rid of him.
Right.
But we can discuss that more in a future episode.
Yeah.
So what do you think? You think, I guess we're going to go with older Jedi then?
Yeah, I'm going to go with older Jedi. I think the older Jedi are better in battle just because experience, power.
No, I would agree with you, man.
That, yeah.
I'm all about that.
Yep, team old school.
All right, well, next we What do we got?
Well, now we're down to our feature.
Oh, yes, our featured topic, From a Certain Point of View.
From a certain point of view, yes. So today's feature, we're going to talk about the Mandalorian TV show.
Yeah, now, keep in mind, everybody, that up until, I don't know, I think it was like last week, all we knew was that Jon Favreau was going to be doing a live-action TV series.
Mm-hmm.
We had no idea what it was going to be about. And then out of nowhere, he actually sent out a tweet that talked about the show was going to be called The Mandalorian, and it was going to be about this Mandalorian who is sort of like an Old West gunfighter.
Yeah, like a Lone Ranger.
Yeah, like a Lone Ranger, and, you know, beyond the reaches of the Republic. And, you know, he was talking about that. And then I think it was either the next week or a couple of days later or something, he actually tweeted out a picture of a guy in a Mandalorian suit. And, of course, there's speculations on, you know, what actor is playing them. So far, nothing has really been announced. But what do you think of this whole concept?
I think it's going to be interesting. It takes place between right after the fall of the Empire and before the First Order. So once again, there's a big gap right there that you can cover, and there's a bunch of adventures and stories you can tell out of that.
Yeah, it takes place, if I remember correctly, it's 6 years after Return of the Jedi.
So with the Mandalorian aspect, you know, you got to kind of wonder if Boba Fett's going to pop back up. And
well,
he
did mention Boba Fett and Jango in a tweet. Now, so even though we know, you have to remember that in the old expanded universe, which is now Legends, Boba Fett's origin was quite a bit different from the way George, when he borrowed everything, he just retconned the whole thing. So in the beginning, they basically explained Boba Fett was a Mandalorian by the name of Jaster Reel. And he basically, you know, I forgot if he turned against him or he did something. But that was the thing. Now, of course, we know that once the prequels came out, his origin became quite a bit different.
Right.
That they weren't even really Mandalorians. I mean, Jango may have been. But, I mean, Boba Fett, from what I understand, I think he just stole the armor or something like that. And you're right, it is going to be interesting to see, did he actually get out of the Sarlacc? Now, they reference that somebody in the Mandalorian TV series, or not the TV series, I think it happened in a novel. It might have been the Aftermath. Yeah, it was. It was in the Aftermath trilogy. They talk about how somebody actually stole Boba Fett's armor. Now, they didn't really hint to whether or not he survived the Sarlacc or not, but at least we know his armor is out.
All right, it could have been just digested and, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll tell you, man, I love the idea of this series.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can tell a lot of different stories out of this. I also think that this would be a great time to show, like, some other cool bounty hunters and kind of do that whole...
Yeah, like what they were going to do, or they were going to have that bounty hunter movie that was...
Yeah,
sort of like
that was kind of talked about a little bit. I think this would be a good time to kind of bring that up. And because now you don't have the Jedi, you don't have the Sith, so now it's kind of like a free reign now for the bounty hunters and to kind of do their thing, even though they've always kind of been around anyway. But I think now we can kind of focus on, okay, what that life is like. And I think even what we learned from Rogue One, that, you know, you can tell a great story without the Jedi and the Sith, and you can tell like war tales, or you can tell like these almost
that's true, because
dog bounty hunter type things, you know, and people are into those shows anyway, just in their regular lives. So now you're adding a Star Wars element where they got jetpacks and all these different type of things, and you can tell some really cool things. And I'm sure there'll be hints or things that we see later on in the movies. I just don't want it to have to go, depending on how many seasons this TV show goes up to, I just don't want it to bump right up against Force Awakens. I don't think we need that.
I don't think it will. I mean, first of all, it's taking place way closer to Return of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, it just seems like it's going to be its own thing. I mean, essentially what we're going to get is a 10-hour movie.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first season, I think it's going to be 10 episodes. And it's going to me, it's going to almost have the same effect as Cobra Kai.
Oh, yes.
Because they could have just made another Karate Kid sequel and just had it be what it was. But the fact that they made it a TV series, they could do so much more.
Absolutely.
So now you're going to get, and don't forget that the budget for each episode of The Mandalorian is some insane amount of money.
Yeah, well, and a lot of that is probably just to pay the different directors that they have coming for the show, too.
Yep. And we'll be talking about the directors on our next episode. But I think that one of the things that's great about it is I like the concept because, number one, it gives you the opportunity to explore new areas of the Star Wars universe. They can bring in characters. And then I also wonder, too, are they going to start to bring in Rebels characters like Sabine and that whole Mandalorian, story arc that they did?
And you also got to wonder, like, what kind of rating is it going to be? Like, is it going to be like a PG-13-ish type thing?
I don't actually think that it's going to be, all Star Wars is basically for kids.
Yeah.
But there's different shades of that, right? And I honestly think that this is going to be a little bit more skewed toward the adults.
Right. I think that's something that I think a lot of adults have been asking for. They want Star Wars kind of more grown up a little bit.
Well, the problem with Star Wars, the problem with marketing Star Wars, I should say, is that when George Lucas created it, he created it for kids.
Right.
It was basically something that adults could enjoy, but it was pretty much marketed towards kids. My generation is exactly who Star Wars was for. I was 7 years old when it wasn't even called A New Hope back then. It was just Star Wars.
Right.
Okay. As time has moved on, well, now Star Wars has a problem because it was always basically slanted toward kids, but now I'm 48 years old. So now you have people who have been fans of Star Wars all along. You came in the 90s. Okay, that's still like 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So all these generations of kids have grown up with Star Wars. They are now adults. You also have new generations of kids that you still want to have that same Star Wars experience that we had when we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
So now the only thing that you can do, which I'm hoping is what they're actually doing, is you have to actually market some Star Wars material for adults, some for maybe younger.
Like the teens.
Yeah, like teens, and then you got to do it for the kids.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of it's going, because I think that's how everybody's included in certain things, because I think that kids wouldn't necessarily probably get into the whole bounty hunter thing, maybe.
I don't know.
I mean,
Boba Fett was introduced in, of all things, the holiday special. And, it was like, so I was probably like 8 years old. And instantly, as soon as I saw Boba Fett, and then they released him as an action figure. This is all before Empire Strikes Back came out. So by the time Empire came out, everybody was looking forward to seeing Boba Fett. He was the guy. And then all the bounty hunters. I'd love to see, because they actually did this. I think I talked about it in one of the other podcasts we did, where they had a book called Tales of Mos Eisley. Mm-hmm. And it was basically a collection of short stories that told things from the different bounty hunters and different other characters. I think even the guys that kept the Rancor.
Oh.
They actually had a story about that guy. The Rancor trainer guy.
All right. Yeah, was all crying.
Yeah, that dude. And his friend or whatever. It was like this whole thing, and it was brilliant. They had a story about IG-88 that was so awesome. It made me want an IG-88, either a novel or a movie or something.
Something with him in it, yeah.
Yeah,
but that's what, and that's what I mean.
Don't get me started on these guys.
That's what I'm saying. I think that with the bounty hunter thing, I think you can make that Rogue One-ish. Like, I think if you're going to do it, it's going to be in that Rogue One style.
Yeah, it almost has to be.
Yeah, because it's gritty. It's more the rough side of the underworld type thing. And I think that's where that fits.
Well, what was that series they were going to do? Like 1313 or something? No, I think that was a video game. They're going to do a video game that talked about the underworld of Coruscant.
Right. Yeah, they were talking about doing like all the gangsters and like the huts and everything like that, and you kind of see all that. And yeah, I think it's almost like a crime drama with the Star Wars characters, just about,
exactly.
it's like Star Wars NCIS or something. But, I think that's one of the things that would make, the older population, happy, is just saying, okay, we could see the more gritty, more shoot 'em up style type thing, where now the kids have the cartoon shows on Disney XD. And then, of course, you still have the family-friendly episodic movies. So I think it was a win-win for everybody.
Even those, they started, the first PG-13 one, I think, was episode 3. Watching Anakin crawling out of the lava wasn't exactly the most family-friendly moment of...
Yeah, getting his legs hacked off and...
Talking about how he hates Obi-Wan and...
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that they have dealt with it. And even Rebels. Rebels had some definite darker episodes. Yeah, they had puffer pigs and space whales. But, they also had some really dark themes running throughout it that I thought Rebels was actually a really good balance, because I hated that. I can't say I hated it, but I remember when you and I first saw the very first episode, we were all excited about it, and we were kind of like, oh, it's good, but...
Yeah, where's it going? But but I think that's the cool thing about it, where they can make it dark enough for kids. So you can make it dark enough where, okay, kids can get that edge, where like that whole Ahsoka Vader scene, I mean, that whole battle was kind of dark. And,
and I think
the whole thing with Mustafar, not Mustafar, but what's the planet? Dathomir.
Well, that was, no, well, yeah.
Because like...
Or something... Oh, man, I blanked out.
I know.
I blanked out.
It's the medicine, man.
Well, you guys, you tell us about it in the comment section.
But yeah, correct. I just think that, there's a lot of different things that were shown, and you can make it dark enough where a lot of things are implied with the cartoons, whereas you do something like a Netflix Mandalorian show or something that now you can kind of really get more grown up with it, and that could be cool.
Yeah, I would just really like to see something that really is truly marketed toward adults, that kids could watch it. I'm not saying make it to where kids couldn't even watch it.
Yeah, it's not, we don't need like strong sexual content in the Star Wars movies or anything.
It doesn't have to be like Game of Thrones or something, but just make it to where it's marketed more toward adults. Because adults truly love Star Wars, and there's a lot of adult themes that you could explore, and that I think would actually do nothing but expand the whole thing. And I think The Mandalorian is a good first step.
Absolutely. All right.
Well, it's time for our next segment, which, of course, is the segment that we answer all of your submitted questions, which we call Clear Your Mind. So, on Clear Your Mind, we have a question. We only took one question on this one because it's a good one, and we could talk about this one for a while.
Yeah, it's probably good because we've been talking a lot about everything else today.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about everything else. So, we decided to keep it to one question. Usually we do about 1 to 3 questions because we want to be able to actually spend time, especially if you guys take the time to submit questions. We want to spend a little time answering them, not give you like a 1-sentence answer. So this one is from Barry Helmick, and he asks, in all the other non-numbered movies, like Rogue One and Solo, they closed all the loose ends in Rogue, but in Solo they left a huge loose end by leaving Solo's girlfriend alive. What are the plans to explain her, since there is no mention of her in the other movies? Well, Barry.
Go ahead.
Well, basically, there's a couple of things you got to look at. Number one, they didn't really count on Solo not performing well. I think they were actually going to do some sequels that was going to talk about what happened to Kira, because Kira is who Barry's talking about.
Right.
And it is true that they did open up this door where they talked about this woman who ended up being probably one of the best characters in that movie. And then you're wondering, okay, how come she didn't appear in any other movies? Look, you're going to run into this problem because as they move forward, and this is why I hope they keep doing things like they're doing with The Mandalorian, where they literally expand the universe, because if you keep playing too much with the original trilogy's timeline, and this is why I say we didn't really need a solo origin story. If you're going to do a movie about a classic trilogy character, you have to introduce new people into it, obviously. The first thing that you're going to ask is, well, what happened to all these people? Now, let me just start by answering it this way. There's probably people in your life who you used to hang with in maybe high school or college, and then you lose track of them, right? And they're not part of your current life anymore. And the absence of them doesn't mean that they disappeared off the face of the planet. It just means that they're not in your circle anymore. So the fact that Kira is not mentioned in any of the original trilogy movies or any of the other movies isn't necessarily a problem, because the universe is a really big place. I mean, think about it. Everything that we talk about here takes place on planet Earth, and you can lose track of people. Whereas now you've got this entire universe full of all these planets. The fact that we don't have the fact that a character doesn't pop up in this little narrow focus we have of the universe is not a weird thing. On the other hand, though, keep in mind that they did, I think, want to expand her story, and I don't think we've seen the last of her.
Yeah, I think I'll have to agree with you. Like, you made a very good point of saying that, with us being just on Earth, yeah, you can totally lose people. You can lose people within a city. Yeah. So the fact that these people are like hopping on ships and jumping in hyperdrive and flying clear across the galaxy, I mean, people can be anywhere. So, I mean, and then also I think that you're right that he probably, now that he has the Falcon, he probably does want to go back and to Corellia and find Kira. But if we will see that being, done, I don't think they're going to make a Solo 2. So,
well, here's even a bigger question, right? As amazing as she is, now keep in mind, for those of you who didn't see the movie, they brought Maul back. Mm-hmm. So, sorry if you didn't see it, but look, it's been out for a while, guys. But here's the interesting thing. So you find out that she's an operative for this criminal organization called Crimson Dawn. Well, a bigger question is, why haven't you heard of them Now, of course, they had... I'm trying to remember if they did mention Crimson Dawn. I know they had the Black Sun Syndicate. Black Sun was like the criminal organization that we learned about in the expanded universe, now Legends. I'm trying to remember if Crimson Dawn is a recent invention or if it's something that was brought up and then they just brought it back. But those are the kinds of things that you have to ask yourself, too. You got to remember that the movies take place in a very small window, and they're not going to be able to address every little thing. There's going to be new things that are introduced in events that happen before the films that you may not hear from again, not because it was an oversight or it was just a simple case of, well, we didn't write this movie back then. It's a natural in-universe explanation.
Yeah, and you have to also remember the focus. The focus is Solo and what he's trying, like who he's becoming. And I think even though Kira was a big part of his life, I think throughout this whole process, throughout the movie, him meeting Lando and everything like that, it's kind of like, and Chewie, he kind of found this whole other life. And although he probably still misses Kira and, hopes to find her again, he probably thinks, given the situation too, she's probably dead, or in a situation, because of the way the Corellia was at the time.
Well, it's amazing how much it scrambled because, there's that site, Quora, that question site.
Right.
Which, of course, we're starting with our next episode. There's a lot of people that have been asking me questions off of that. So we're taking questions there, too. One of the questions, I kid you not. This guy writes in and he says, hey, when are we ever going to get a sequel to Solo to explain how he met Leia?
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, I couldn't, and this is one of the things that was addressed to me,
Called
right?
episode 4.
Yeah. I mean, and I was like one of the guys that my answer was upvoted. I'm like, yeah, it's called A New Hope. Right? I mean, I try to be cool about things like that, but I could not contain myself. Well, then I scrolled down to the other people that had answered the guy too, and they were all saying the same thing. Like, yeah, man, it's called A New Hope.
Yeah, you got to take the shot, man.
And I mean, hey, if you're the one that asked that question and, we're just having a little bit of fun at your expense, which
we sometimes do.
Yeah, that's how we roll, man. That's how we roll.
How harmless, though. Well.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up this week's episode.
Yeah, it's good to be back. It's good to be back home.
It is. Instead of Return of the Jedi, we have Return of the Co-Host.
Well, in the words of Han Solo from episode 4, let's blow this thing and go home.
Amen to that. All right. Well, thanks, everybody, for joining us. I'm Eric Vancil.
And I'm Darryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.